So on day 39 of week 8 of filming Behind the Scenes with The Chosen, there was kind of some interesting stuff going on. We haven't really seen too much of the Romans so far, other than the normal ones like Quintus and Atticus and Gaius, but we haven't seen Pontius Pilate again, or really any of the other really important Romans that we should be seeing in terms of biblical understanding. But now, day 39 finally delivers us not only Pontius Pilate, but actually Herod Antipas. At least that's what I believe this is. And so as we look at all of this, we have to start understanding the full picture of what is actually going on. So let's check out these clips, and then we'll dive into what it means that Herod Antipas is here, who he is, and what role does he have to play in everything, right? And what this scene could possibly be, which is really interesting. So let's dive in. So we see a large kind of, overhanging area here, and there seems to be 3 or 4 kind of raised beds next to a table. Now, this is really, really common during the time of Jesus in general for people to eat while lounging, right? So this was a very Jewish thing, but also it was a very Roman thing during their time. It was kind of like this high standing sort of like, I can afford to eat laying down because I don't have to worry about anything sort of mentality. For the Jewish people, it was really about relaxing, spending time together at fellowship. But here we're seeing the Romans sit down at what looks to be a meal or a banquet, and they're all together kind of eating, drinking, lounging while doing so. And so we see this large kind of set here that we haven't seen before, but we get introduced to the characters here in just a second. So as we continue on, this gets more and more interesting for sure. So here we see a top-down view of the same thing. We're seeing some of the actors and actresses kind of around the area. But here is where we get really, really into the action. So there seems to be multiple people around this table, which we're going to go around. Now we know Pontius Pilate and Claudia, who we met before in season 3, but we also meet some new people. There is one other character, though, that we know for sure is in this, which is Joanna. Joanna, we've already seen as she delivers the bad news about John the Baptist to the group. We've seen her in the behind the scenes. We've seen her in the Chosen's YouTube videos. So sitting next to her at this table, I assume, is her husband, Chusa, which we know from Scripture is her husband's name. He is the member of Herod's court, which links her to all of this in the first place. And so let's watch a little bit of this, and we'll kind of go through piece by piece. So there's Joanna sitting right there. We know her clear as day. We've seen her that crown before. We've seen, all of her features. Like, that's definitely Joanna. So sitting next to her, I assume, is Chusa, and then some other people next to them that we don't really know. Then, at the front of the table, we've got Pilate and Claudia, who we know from season 3. This is really, really big. Really, really cool to see them again. I never really imagined them being at this banquet, which we'll talk about in a second. But it's definitely possible that they could be. So, really interesting there.
I need matzah, but I have it here. Yeah.
Then finally, we see this couple over here. And at first, I really didn't think anything about this couple. But there's some other angles that we can look at, and that kind of really convinced me that this is most likely Herod and Herodias. Now, this is Herod Antipas, which we'll talk about in just a second. But his wife, Herodias, or his brother's wife, as we might say, is here with him, and she is a hugely important figure to John the Baptist and everything that happens with him. So we're seeing them here as well, and I believe this is them, just because they're the most gaudy. Like, they're very, her crown is the biggest. He's kind of wearing this crown with jewels on it, very ornate, and, I don't know. I could be wrong, but that's kind of my thought overall. We also get this image here, which is very focused on Herod, at least who I believe to be Herod. And yeah, seems like a very important dude. And again, Herod is the ruler, right? So in Scripture, he's kind of called the tetrarch, or sometimes he's called the king, even though he's not a king, technically. Like we kind of heard John the Baptist talk about earlier on in The Chosen. It's kind of like this they weren't quite sure like what to call him at certain points. But they knew who he was, right? He was the ruler. He was the guy who was like in charge of everything. He was put in charge by the Romans. And so while he is like technically a Jew, like he's not really. Like there's a lot of weird things that happen there. And obviously he was not someone who was very fond of like all of the Jewish customs and didn't follow all those different things, which is why John the Baptist kind of attacked him in the way that he did and was going after him in that way, which got him in trouble in the first place. But thinking about this banquet, what could this banquet be? Where could this be? Why would all these people be together? Well, if we take a look in Scripture, there's actually a couple of different, things that we could look at here. So let's dive real quick before we continue in the video. I want to let you know that we're going to Israel in January of 2024. This is going to be an amazing trip, and we've only got a few spots left. We're taking Isaac David, who runs Daily Disciple, along with John McCrae, who runs What Do You Meme here on YouTube. Some seriously amazing Christian channels. You should check them out right now. But if you want to meet with us in Israel and be a part of this awesome trip, then you can see all the links in the description down below to get signed up. I tried my very best to make sure that this trip was as affordable as possible so that you could go to Israel. So check out those links in the description down below, and we'd love to see you over there. Let's get back to the video. Now, if we look at Mark chapter 6, and I'm reading this in the ESV, we look at the death of John the Baptist. Mark chapter 6, verse 14, talks about it this way. It says, Herod heard of it. He heard of Jesus sending out the disciples 2 by 2. For Jesus' name had become known. Some said, John the Baptist has been raised from the dead. This is why these miraculous powers are at work within him. But others said, he is Elijah. And others said, he is a prophet, like one of the prophets of old. But when Herod heard of it, he said, John, whom I beheaded, has been raised. So he believed that Jesus was not Jesus, but that he was John the Baptist raised back to life, and now he has these miraculous abilities. For it was Herod who had sent and seized John and bound him in prison for the sake of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, because he had married her. For John had been saying to Herod, it is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife. So pretty nasty guy overall, and definitely breaking a few laws there, right? And Herodias had a grudge against him and wanted to put him to death. So she really didn't like John at all, and she was really, really against him. But she could not, for Herod feared John, knowing that he was a righteous and holy man, and kept him safe. So Herod Antipas actually kept him safe. Herod didn't want John to die because he feared him in a way. When he heard him, he was greatly perplexed, and yet he heard him gladly. So when he heard him, he was intrigued by what John was saying. He didn't really understand, but he was interested in what John was actually saying. But an opportunity came when Herod on his birthday gave a banquet for his nobles and military commanders and the leading men of Galilee. So this is what I think this banquet actually is. Again, who would be the military commanders and the leading men of Galilee? Well, that would be probably the people of his court, including Chusa, which includes Joanna, right, in that. Then we also see Pilate and his wife Claudia, and we see Herod. So we may see a bunch of other couples and different people that are here, part of that military structure, part of that political structure that he's had, but he's inviting all these people. So for when Herodias' daughter came in and danced, she pleased Herod and his guests. And the king said to the girl, ask me for whatever you wish, and I will give it to you. And he vowed to her, whatever you ask me, I will give it. I will give you up to half of my kingdom. And she went out to her mother and said, for what should I ask? And she said, the head of John the Baptist. And so she came in immediately with haste, and to the king asked, saying, I want you to give me at once the head of John the Baptist on a platter. And the king was exceedingly sorry, but because of his oaths and his guests, he did not want to break his word to her. And immediately the king sent an executioner with orders to bring John's head. He went and beheaded him in the prison and brought his head on a platter and gave it to the girl, and the girl gave it to her mother. When his disciples heard of it, they came and took his body and laid it in a tomb. So this is the scripture in which we definitely, I think this has to be this banquet, right? With Pilate and Chusa and Joanna. Like it all just makes so much sense for the Chosen to put it in this frame. And then after this scene is where we get Joanna going to Capernaum to tell everybody about the bad news of what's happened. Now, I would love to see this full scene played out with the dancing of Salome, who we know is as Herod Antipas's daughter. And it would be really interesting to see the whole scene just played out in a way that maybe we haven't really before. Now, I know some people were mentioning that there's an older version of this, and a way older version, a film called Salome, I believe. But I haven't dug into that quite yet, so obviously this would be a way modern take and a new take on it. But it would be really interesting to see this scripture played out in its entirety and to look at all the different angles, not just from one perspective, but from the perspective of Joanna and the disciples and Herod and Pilate, and seeing how all of these different things kind of shape up all together. It would be really, really cool to see. I would love, love, love to see that. But yeah, this could be a really hard scene too, knowing that this is the end of John the Baptist's life and all of that. Glad to see Pilate back. Glad to see Claudia back. I do wonder what role they'll play here. And as we get more into season 4, how much of a bigger figure Pilate's going to be actually. But overall, we kind of understand more the system at work here. We know that Herod the Great then had, his sons and different things here. And of course, Herod Antipas being one of those who was a big, big power in this realm during the time of Jesus. Really, really big deal. Really a huge part of what's going on here as well. So anyway. Yes, that was Herod's niece that danced for him. Yes, it's some very strange things going on in Herod's house. But that wasn't uncommon for a lot of the Roman-influenced people, right? They had a lot of weird things going on. So, the fact that he's with his brother's wife, the fact that his niece is the one that's dancing for them is just, it's all very, very strange. So, anyway. Interesting scene. I'm really excited for it. So we'll see what's coming up. And of course, Dallas finishing this one out with a beautiful pose. I hope you like this small piece of our live stream. If you want to see the full entire live stream, I think it's like 2.5 hours, almost 3 hours long. You can go check that out on our Patreon at patreon.com/thesnipelife. This is by far the best way to help support our ministry and to get extra content, including a full podcast every single week that we do on our second channel, Better Not Easy. Anyway, we'll see you on the next one. Peace.